Hello, this webinar is titled Resistance to Tyrants is Obedience to God, Calling All 20-somethings. Well, I'm calling you 20-year-olds to follow 29-year-old Jonathan Mayhew and also 26-year-old Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What do I mean? Well, this sermon given in 1750, Resistance to Tyrants is Obedience to God, was given by 29-year-old Jonathan Mayhew. Today, we're calling all 20-somethings to this same level of courage. Can you answer the call with a fraction of Mayhew's courage? Let's take a look at this for a minute. John Adams said pastors must preach on the most pressing issues of the day when he is an adult, but notably he was a 15-year-old and sitting in the congregation on January in 1750, hearing this 29-year-old give this sermon. Mayhew's context was this. He preached against Charles worship and King Charles' veneration. 100 years before, King Charles had been overthrown by the people for being a tyrant. He was killed during the uprising. 100 years later, however, much of the church was still worshiping Charles as a martyr and as a great and noble king. Mayhew's message was that he was not, that he was a tyrant that abused his office. Mayhew's message was revulsive to the clergy of the day. He said that rulers as do not perform the pleasure of God by doing good, but the pleasure of the devil by doing evil, and such as are not, therefore, God's ministers, but the devil's. Those who resist a lawless, unreasonable power, which is contrary to the will of God, do therein resist the will and ordinance of God, he asked? Is resisting those who resist God's will the same thing as resisting God directly? He thought not. It's blasphemy, he said, to call tyrants and oppressors God's ministers. They are more properly the messengers of Satan to buffet us. No rulers are properly God's ministers, but such are just and ruling in the fear of God. When once magistrates act contrary to their office and the end of their institution, that is, civil government, when they rob and ruin the public instead of being guardians of its peace and welfare, they immediately cease to be the ordinance and ministers of God and no more deserve that glorious character, that is, that recognition and honor, than common pirates or highwaymen. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Robert Treat Paine, a biographer of Mayhew, said this. At the time of this sermon, it had the effect of maddening the corrupt, frightening the timid, rousing the apathetic, and bracing the patriot heart. He continued, it is difficult now to realize the severity of the test of temper, of courage, of manliness, faithfulness, amid which these words were spoken from Dr. Mayhew's pulpit. Words so bold, so decided, allusions so direct and pointed that none could mistake, none could evade, principles so fatal to despotic polity in church or state as to wear the very garb of rebellion. Well, 200 years later, Bonhoeffer, in his own way, in Germany, pre-Hitler, had that same courage. In 1932, Dietrich Bonhoeffer gave a message against worshiping the state or the Führer, and people walked out of the sermon on that day. Silence in the face of evil, he said, is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. He also said, if I sit next to a madman as he drives a car into a group of innocent bystanders, I can't as a Christian simply wait for the catastrophe, then comfort the wounded and bury the dead. I must try to wrestle the steering wheel out of the hands of the driver. He also said, we are not simply to bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice, we are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. Christendom adjusts itself far too easily to the worship of power. Christians should give more offense, shock the world far more than they are doing now. Well, the letter to the American church is a way that you can hear Bonhoeffer's warning for the church in America today. And at this website, you can find the 60-minute documentary, and I commend it to your watching. 20-year-olds were also a part of resisting Hitler's rise to power in the White Rose Resistance, and they lost their lives in the cause. So we're calling all 20-somethings today to make your life count. Your 20s is a great time of life. Have fun, form friendships, grow emotionally, socially, spiritually, but grow up. Cultivate a deep trust in God, an ability to think critically, not groupthink, a serious mindedness, a desire to advance the kingdom of God, and an awareness of how much social media influences and propagandizes you. The socialdilemma.com movie is something I commend to your viewing. Be strong and courageous. You live in a world of lies. You have been lied to, and so you need to be a seeker of the truth. Follow 29-year-old Jonathan Mayhew. Follow 26-year-old Dietrich Bonhoeffer. My name's Craig Seibert, calling all 20-year-olds to something great. Thanks for listening.